So good morning, everyone. Welcome and happy Monday. I hope everyone is doing well, and welcome to our webinar on negotiating with peers and family whilst we are all in this very complex and difficult situation these days. Our guest today is Fabiola Tassy, who is a senior legal counsel at Golder, and she is also an instructor in negotiation skills at the School of Continuing Studies. And she graciously agreed to share her insights with us this morning on how we could be better negotiators. So Fabiola, the floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Ina. Good morning, everyone. I hope you had a good weekend and you're having so far a good Monday. I hope I can make your Monday even better with this webinar. I hope everyone can help me well, can hear me well. So this webinar is going to be, hopefully, I can improve your situation because you have accepted this webinar because you are quarantined with your family and your peers and you would like some tip with regards to how to improve the situation. We all do. So we are all in this situation together, and hopefully I will be able to give you some tips to improve your situation at least a little better in this crisis that we're all going through. As Ina mentioned, oops, going to the next slide, yay. So as Ina mentioned, I just wanted to give you a little bit of my profile. I'm a lawyer, I'm a member of the Quebec Bar, and I work as a senior legal counsel at Golder, an engineering consulting firm. You can see my previous experience at Siemens, Pratt & Whitney, and my expertise is mainly in negotiating agreements and claims. And I have also attended many corporate training. And as Ina mentioned, I do teach a negotiation workshop at McGill School of Continuing Studies. So let's start. This is going to be the agenda. So we're going to look at the four letters, HISC. Then we will discuss how we're going to split the pizza. We'll move on to family conflicts, and then the gift of conflict, and we'll finish with what is the pie and the prisoner's dilemma. So we are all stuck at home, and we are forced to quarantine with certain people that we chose, you know, our family, our peers, our friends, et cetera, and hopefully I think this is an opportunity for us to improve our negotiation skills that we will eventually, you know, learn from this in the future as well. I just wanted to start and share an HBR tip first. HBR is the Harvard Business Review tip. It's a management tip. If some of you don't know it, it's an application you can download on your phone. And if you type HBR tip, so it gives different management tips every single day, very small tips. And I thought it was a strange coincidence that last week on April 23rd, that tip was exactly for this webinar. This is why I wanted to share it with you. So this tip was saying that in typical negotiations, whether we are at work or whether we want to sell our car, our house and whatnot, the focus is always how we can maximize gains. That is always the focus on standard negotiation. But in times of crisis, in the times that we live right now, it's a little bit different. The time that we have now, where we live in a very stressful situation, the collaborative mindset should be the objective of the negotiation. It should be to minimize losses rather than maximize gains. And what does collaborative mindset mean? It means to be transparent with your family, your friends, your peers, the people you're quarantined with. It means to be open. And it also means to always remember the fact that we all share the same common purpose. We always have the same objective. Now, the collaborative mindset is a way of negotiating that is applicable for everything, for work as well, for everyday life. But it is especially important today when you're in a situation of stress and you're in a situation of crisis. So keep that in mind. It's an HBR tip that I found very useful. So during the presentation, you will see a few words of wisdom popping once in a while. This is one of them. Most people do not listen with the intent to understand. Most people listen with the intent to reply. I'll let you reflect on that. So let's start with the first topic of the agenda, HISC. Focus is on the H. HISC. Those are the four-letter words that are inspired from the book Getting to Yes. It is based on the principle negotiation. My negotiation workshop course is it gives those very much a lot of details on those four letters and principle negotiations. For the sake of this webinar, we will focus on the first two letters, the H and the I. So the first one is human, the second is interest, and then you have solutions, and C for criteria. So let's look at the H. So when you're negotiating or when you're having an argument or a conflict with people you're quarantined with, your family, your kids, your friends, whoever, you need to focus on the H, the human being. That is the key, not to always remember. If this is the only thing that you remember from this entire webinar, I will have done 80% of my job. So what does that mean? You need to put people first. In every negotiation, especially at work, it's very easy to forget the fact that we are dealing with human. But today, the fact that we're quarantined with people that we choose, of course, and that we love, but the situation, it's easy to remember, it's easier to remember that we are dealing with human beings. Now, as you know, because we are the same creatures, we are human beings as well, we are very complex creatures. We are not abstract representatives. We have emotions, we have values, we have different backgrounds, we have strong opinions. And we are, all of us, including me, unpredictable. And we need to acknowledge that fact when we are negotiating with our peers. It's very, very important. So the first thing we need to do before we even start to negotiate, before we even start to discuss anything with anyone, with our kids, with our roommate, with our spouse, is ask ourselves that question in our head. Am I paying enough attention to the people problem? This is the key that we need to always ask ourselves in our mind. This always needs to be in our mind. Am I paying enough attention to the people problem? I'll give you an example. So I'm fine, no worries, but I know the strategy. So far we've seen a lot of people do happy hours or organize, dinners at home. So for example, you're with your spouse and you've decided 2 weeks in advance that you're gonna organize a really nice dinner as if you were in a restaurant. It's gonna be at home. You've prepared the wine, you've prepared a menu, everything is prepared, and you guys are very excited about that, right? So say the dinner starts at 7:30. So you're sitting there and you're waiting, for everything is ready, but there's your spouse usually plays video games and things like that. He usually does that, but that's something that he does. So you're waiting for the dinner, and the spouse, by coincidence, received a call from his boss. I mean, you don't know that, but he received a call from his boss, and he had to stay, I don't know, maybe an extra hour. So he arrives 30 minutes late. So there are three answers you could give. The first one would say, my boss just called. It was terrible. He's always asking me for things at the last minute. I'm so stressed. Where's my wine? Second answer could be, I'm sorry I'm late. But my boss called and I had to take that call. He's really stressing me out. I'm so stressed out. Third answer is he arrives 30 minutes late. He says, I'm sorry I'm late. Now, I can understand that you must be very upset because you've been waiting for me for 30 minutes and we've prepared this dinner for weeks and weeks. What can I do to make it better? So, of course, the third answer is the best. The third answer acknowledges the fact that the person has been waiting for them for 30 minutes and must be very upset. It acknowledges the person, the individual, rather than focus on himself and the fact that he had a call with his boss and that he's stressed out. The fact that he had a call with his boss is always going to be relevant, but he doesn't need to bring it right away. He can bring it later on during the dinner, the next day. That will always be true. But the fact is, before he even starts the discussion, he needs to acknowledge the people problem. And that problem is that that person is probably irritated because they've been waiting for 30 minutes and they probably think that you're playing video games. So you need to acknowledge that. Another thing that's important is communication. As you know, there is no negotiation without communication. It's important to communicate. And when I say communicate, and I'm especially speaking to the parents with kids who more or less listen, it's very important to have a back and forth discussion. not a monologue, not just telling people what to do because I said so and whatnot. It's really important to have a back and forth discussion and to reach at the end a joint decision, because this is how this is going to be easier after, and you're going to create some kind of a precedent or some kind of a behavior, and it's going to be more interesting as well for you because you're going to have a joint back and forth discussion with your child or with your spouse or with your roommate. So it's a win-win as well. So we're done with the H. Let's talk about the I, the second letter, interest. So we all have interests. Everybody who walks into a negotiation, who wants something, has an interest. So what are those interests? Those interests are needs, they're desires, there are fears. And I'll talk about position later on, but what you need to remember is that interests are not positions. And I'll talk about that, the difference later on. I'll give you an example of an interest. Somebody at work who asks his or her boss, I want a salary increase of, I don't know, $10,000. So if the boss digs a little further, maybe you could ask, why do you need a salary increase? Why are you coming here? You've been working in this company for, I don't know, a year. Why do you need the salary increase? Well, you know what? I just bought a new house, and that house is 50 kilometers away, and I have to drive back and forth. And do you know how much time that wastes? It costs me gas. So there's one interest. Maybe there's an opportunity there to work remotely because he's saying that it's taking him forever with the traffic to go back and forth. Another answer could be, well, I want more prestige. I want to be recognized. So maybe you want a title. Maybe rather than being a director, what you want is to be a vice president. So maybe, you know, there are other ways to address the person's demands than just by the $10,000. So there are ways to be creative. And of course, for these days, we're taking out, I guess, a lot of food. If you have a roommate or your spouse who says, I want to order Chinese food today. And it's a very, very strict demand. I really want to order Chinese food. You say, well, I was thinking that I wanted to make spaghetti. And of course, then you can just argue, no, let's order in. No, let's make spaghetti. You could go on and on back and forth. Rather, you could say, well, what is it about Chinese food that you like so much? Well, you know, I like the spices. I like the noodles. What about you? What is it about spaghetti that's so important? Well, I like the fact that I can have my red wine with my spaghetti, and I like the noodles. And I want to spend time together and cook together. So maybe there's an opportunity there. Maybe you could just make, you know, Chinese noodles, and then that person could still have their red wine. So there's a way to meet both people's interests there and reach a joint decision. I was going to mention that I was going to differentiate positions versus interests. As we mentioned earlier, interests are needs, fears. Positions are demands. I want this price. Of course, positions are a way to satisfy interest, but you will never really get the real information if you only focus on the positions. Somebody says, I want this for breakfast, or I want a car, or I want this. Fine, it's a position, but it's very different than an interest. We just discussed this with the example of the salary and with the example of the takeout versus the spaghetti. Now, let's go back to those letters. We looked at the H, we looked at the I, the S and C, we will go, the C I will not cover. This is something I cover in detail in my negotiation workshop. I will not cover. And in the situation we are here now, it's very much important to focus on the H. So let's look briefly at the S, solutions. It's important to look for solutions in order to leave both sides satisfied with the outcome. And I'll give you, we looked at examples earlier with the salary negotiation and the takeout versus the spaghetti. And we'll look at another example later on. There are other things as well that you can do with regards to solutions. BATNA, you're probably familiar with that, best alternative to a negotiating agreement. ZOPA is also zone of possible agreement. I just wanted to mention them in the event that you're interested, but those are also, there are many ways you can find solutions in negotiations. Let's go back to a summary of that. So it's very important in this type of negotiation to put the people first. The H is the key. You're dealing with human beings. As you know, think of yourself, how complex we are, how much emotions we have, how many opinions we have. It's important to communicate. Look at the person's interests. Don't just focus on the position, and look for solutions that leave hopefully everybody happy. preparation if you can, and then there's the zuppa and the batna that you can also consider if you can. Now, I just wanted to give an example of how to split a pizza. It's an example of an interest. So I don't know about you, but I've been eating a lot of pizza these days, which is why I use that example. But when I was a child, I used to order pizza once in a while with my sister. And we used to argue about, of course, each one of us wanted the biggest piece. I mean, of course, we want to eat more. And we were always saying, she was saying, well, I'm older and I'm bigger, so I belonged, I deserve the biggest piece. It's simple. I said, well, me, I did the dishes all day and I did all this homework, so I need, and I do more sports, so I need the bigger piece. And we used to argue and argue and argue. And at the end, we realized, okay, fine, one cuts, the other one chooses. That was just the fairest option that we could reach. But were there other ways, other options we could have considered than this standard one, which is okay, it's fair, but does that option really satisfy? Are there other ways to make us more satisfied? Of course. How could we better satisfy both parties? Well, we hadn't read the book Getting to Yes, and we did not know the principal negotiation strategy, but we could have asked questions to better understand our interests. I could have asked my sister, well, what is it about the pizza that you like so much? And she would have said, well, I like the crust and I like the pepperoni. And she could have said the same. What about you? What is it that you like so much? Well, I like the anchovies and I like the tomatoes. So there are other ways that we could have switched and shared the pizza, so we would have been much happier rather than one cuts, the other one chooses. One tip that I would recommend is, in order to get information on the person's interest, and also on your own as well, is to ask questions. The person who asks questions, of course, does not speak. The person is listening. It's very important to listen. You learn as well. Maybe you'll learn something, and you receive important information about what the person needs. So ask questions, a lot of questions, and that will also guide the course of the conversation. It will encourage a back and forth discussion rather than just a monologue. Some questions are very important. There are close questions, of course. Close questions, though, they are good. Of course, they are good. And they help you when you want a decision to be made. What do you want for breakfast? Or can you make your bed today? It's clear. It's not necessarily bad, but it doesn't give you as much information as the interest. So go back to when you were a kid. When you were a kid, remember, we used to always ask why, what, how. Go back to when you were a kid and ask those open questions. This is how you will get information on the person's interest. Another quote, which I thought was really relevant: speak when you are angry and you will make the best speech you will ever regret. I think we can all relate to that, especially in these times. Third topic is the family conflict. This is an article that was written by Lapin Negotiations that discussed 3 strategies on how to manage family conflicts. So they give us 3 strategies to manage volatile conversation and emotionally charged situation, which I'm sure we're dealing with right now. So the first strategy is, whenever you're having a family conflict, show that individual, that person, that you are taking them seriously. What's very important is that when there are a lot of people with a lot of opinion these days, and I'll give one example, how our government is managing the crisis and kids coming back to school. You hear a lot of different opinions about this topic. It's a very, very controversial. And, you know, the elderly, etc. So you have a lot of opinions that we're dealing with right now. So it's very important to remember that other people's views will not define you, but your reaction to that view will. So it's very important, if you hear something that you strongly disagree with and you think is it's just unacceptable, it's very important not to react, not to attack. Suspend that reaction and judgment and just listen. And when I say listen, don't just let the person speak and you're just waiting to respond. Remember the quote earlier? It's not about just listening and to just prepare your answer. It's an active listening. And to demonstrate that you're listening, paraphrase. So I'll give you an example. For example, if you have someone, your roommate, who says, you know, the prime minister should have never closed the stores, nor the companies, nor anything. They should have just let everybody go and we could have just figured it out and that's it. And you strongly disagree with that. You think it's the opposite. You think the government probably is not doing enough and should have caused more, should have done even more than they're doing today. So rather than attacking, you can say, okay, so Michael, let's say that colleague is Michael. Michael, if I understand properly, you think the government should have closed even the stores or the pharmacies. Is that what I understand? So first of all, that person will know that you were listening, and that has value. And understanding the person, demonstrating that you're understanding, doesn't mean that you agree. It means that you were listening, and that's key. The second strategy is practice constructive curiosity. Ask questions. Not questions that are judgmental or that are like a police or investigative, but genuine questions that will encourage a conversation, not a confrontation. One example. Let's keep that example of how the government is managing the crisis. So, for example, if they say they should have, they should have let everything open, et cetera, one question that is not constructive would be to say, well, I mean, how do you know this? Have you done some research? Do you have any examples of countries where this worked? What do do you have examples? Do you have any sources? Do you have any evidence? Not a constructive question that will entail conversation. This will encourage confrontation. One question that would be good would be, that's interesting. So, how can you explain better? Help me understand. How do you think that the government would have, reacted if we would have closed, let everything open? Help me understand your point of view a little better. Give me more details. I'm curious about that. I'm interested. Much better answer, much better question that the person will probably want to respond. I mean, if somebody asks you a question like that, of course you want to respond, rather than say, how do you know this? Do you have any evidence of this? Have you read any documentation? It's a very judgmental question. That type of question has its place, but just not in a family conflict. Third strategy is share your point of view, but make sure that it is a point of view, not the point of view. The purpose of this discussion of this conflict is not to persuade them to agree with you. It's not to influence them. It's to have a discussion, that's all, and to have a dialogue. That's all we want to do. That is the only objective. So one example would be, a bad example would be, well, based on this documentation I've read, the best option is to close everything because such and such and such and such. That's the point of view. Make sure you explain it as a point of view. You can say, yes, well, the concern that I have with leaving everything open and not closing is such and such and such. What are your thoughts about that? So now the person, after you have gone through the first two steps, first of all, you listen to them. They feel listened. When people feel listened, they feel respected. They will be much more open to listen to you and to give you the same treatment you gave them. So you just gave them the example. So of course they will follow your example because you just listened to them and you just respected them. So they will do the same to you as well. And then the person will explain, and then you just go back and forth. And remember that the purpose is not to persuade them or necessarily agree with them. That's not the purpose. The purpose is to have a dialogue, a conversation. I mean, you're quarantined with those people. So at the end, it's only best to make it more interesting and to have interesting conversations with them rather than confrontations. So as takeaways, remember that people's views will not define you, but how you react to those views will. And when you hear a strong opinion that you completely disagree with, do not react. It's very important. Do not attack. Suspend that reaction and listen, an active listening, by asking questions that encourage curiosity, not judgmental questions. The person is not in court. This is not about asking questions or attacking. It's about curiosity. And when people feel heard, they become more receptive to listen to the others as well. So they will listen to your views and you will feel good as well because you will share your view and they will also listen to you. So share your view again as a point of view, not the point of view. The purpose is not to convince anyone. It's just to have a discussion to avoid a conflict. And you will come out of this much, much like a hero, maybe, who knows, because they will learn from you. Another quote, in conflict, when there is a winner, usually nobody has won. Reflect on that. I reflect quite often on that whenever I negotiate, to make sure when people say that negotiating is about winning, you know, there's a lot of work to do. So let's talk about the fourth topic, the gift of conflict. This isn't a TED Talk. If you're interested, you could go on YouTube and listen to the TED Talk. It's a TED Talk that was written by Amy Gallo. And Amy Gallo gives 3 steps to prepare for difficult conversations. Amy Gallo, in her view, we often, and I'm sure you guys can all relate to that, that sometimes we disagree with someone and we just let it go. We don't bother arguing. We don't bother, you know, sharing our view. We just don't like disagreement. And we as human beings, we are programmed into being likable. And we think that if we disagree, the person will no longer like us, they will be upset, and we don't want to have to deal with that, people not liking us and this and that. Amy Gallo says this is wrong. We should encourage conflict as long as we do it the right way. And she gives us 3 steps. The first one, consider the other person's perspective. So whenever the person is sharing another view, this article is very similar to the to the Lapin negotiation article, by the way. So for example, what is motivating them to think that way? Why are they behaving this way? If you have someone, a child that is screaming or is always texting and never listening to you, why is that person always texting? And why isn't he putting the phone down and paying attention to what I'm saying? And then when you put yourself on the other person's shoe, you think, well, maybe the person has an urgency or something to manage. Maybe the person did not sleep well and so on. So this will help you. A second one is ask yourself before you even start the discussion, what is it that you want from this conversation? By the way, if your goal is to be right, that goal needs to be changed because it's the wrong goal. We discussed that earlier. Ask yourself, what do you need from this conversation? Do you need to preserve the relationship? Do you need to end this conversation and move on with your life? What is it that you need? What is it that you want? Ask yourself that question first. And third one, ask yourself, what are we actually disagreeing about? At work, it's more or less clear cut. When we have a disagreement with our colleagues, most of the time it's about territory or it's about, you know, hierarchy, division of powers, whose decision is it, things like that. But when it's in your personal life, when it's with your family or your peers, it's not always that clear. And I'll give the example of when I gave the example of the takeout versus the spaghetti. What were we disagreeing about, really? Because we both want to eat, we both have the same common purpose, but sometimes we're wondering, what are you actually disagreeing about? What is the issue? We both want to eat, we both want noodles. What is it? What is the concern? And that allows you to detach yourself and not take it so personally, which allows you to approach this conflict with calm and confidence. So those steps help you approach those conflicts with, it allows you to have a conversation with purpose rather than to have just a conversation all over the place. And that can hurt people when at the end you were not even discussing the real issue and you don't even know what you wanted from this conversation. So at the end, a few takeaways, this conflict does not have to mean a war, hate, or pain. Conflict is part of love, and we should embrace that. This is an opportunity, this crisis, for us to learn how to manage conflict, as long as we do it with kindness and compassion. And navigating conflict is a life skill. It's not just a negotiation skill that you can learn. It's something that we should all do all the time because conflict is everywhere. Another word of wisdom, in life you don't get what you deserve, you get what you negotiate. Perhaps some of you have told this to your kids already. The last 2 topics I'm going to go very quickly because I just wanted to show you maybe a little bit of more depth in negotiation. What is the pie? The pie is a way to look at what a negotiation is. The pie is, for example, what is at stake? What is it that we are negotiating? It is the reason behind the negotiation. And what is it that the parties are trying to divide? I'll give you an example. Remember the example with my sister and the pizza, etc. One cuts, the other one chooses. So of course we said one cuts, the other one chooses, 50-50. Pretty, it's fair, not the best. And then we said that we were going to ask each other's questions to see what is it that the person liked about the pizza. But let's say we had more information about each other. Let's say I had eaten all of the appetizers 30 minutes before and I had not shared one appetizer. So of course I'm less hungry than my sister is. So maybe the pie is not really the pizza, but maybe the pie is about the total calorie consumption and the fair share of the calories for dinner. Maybe that's the pie. Who knows? Another example is, I know we don't really go to the airport these days, but it's a hypothetical example that will someday we'll be able to travel again. But say you're at the airport on a business trip and you're coming back home with your colleague. So you've already have everything planned. You've completed your expense report. You've already bought your tickets to take the bus all the way downtown. And then after that, from downtown, you have your subway pass and you'll just take the subway to go home. So your cost to going back home from the airport is zero, costs you $0. Your colleague, on the other hand, already paid $100 to pay for a nice limousine to drive him home. So he lives, for example, in Boucherville. You live in Outremont, downtown. So he's saying, hey, why don't we split the limo together, and we can spend time together and discuss things also in the car, and they can drop you home and then they can drop me back home after in the South Shore. So perhaps that's a good idea. So what is the pie really? Do we split 50-50? Is that fair? Not really, because my cost was zero. So it's not really fair for me to pay $50. And is it for me to pay nothing because it was going to cost me nothing? Not really either, because you're going to be in a car, you're going to be comfortable, you're going to be with your friend. So what is the residual? What is at stake here? So that is what we're asking when we're asking what is the pie. Another example I could ask you is, now that we're quarantined together, we purchase a lot of things for a home, new couch. So how about if your spouse is asking you, I want us to buy a huge flat screen TV so we can watch our movies on Netflix. It'll be great. It costs about $2,000, but it's going to be a huge investment. You're thinking, perhaps, but this quarantine will not last forever. So at some point, we will no longer be using this flat screen TV. So I don't see why half and half would be fair. And then once it starts again, I don't like hockey. You're going to benefit because it's the hockey season and you'll be watching it, but I'm not going to be using it as much. So what's at stake here? How do we divide this exactly? So this is a concept that was brought up by a Yale University negotiation that I just wanted to bring up quickly. I do discuss it a lot in my negotiation workshop. Last one, prisoner's dilemma. I could not resist to bring up this topic because we are all in a certain way prisoners, aren't we? So I wanted to mention the fact, the prisoner's dilemma, which is an example of game theory. Game theory is an advanced concept of negotiation, and it talks about the individuals, the interest of a group versus the interest of one individual. And I'm not going to give more details on that, but I invite you, if you're interested, to give you some homework and to do some reading about the prisoner's dilemma. So thank you. I think if some of you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you so much, Fabiola. I think we have a couple of questions from Maha. She was asking, what about communication with kids who play many disturbing sounds and do not listen to you?
Yes. So I think one of the things, it depends on the kid's age as well, because the communication is going to be different. But I think the most important thing is to focus on the age. When they're doing that, you know, the age, the human being, you need to acknowledge the fact that maybe they have something important to do. But at the end, look at your interest, each other's interests. Why is it so important for that child to always be playing on a video game 24 hours a day? They need to stop at some point to eat, maybe. They need to stop at some point to do something. So I would sit down and maybe ask open questions to the child. Not just make them listen, but ask open questions so that the child can speak and share their interests, and eventually you will find a common ground.
Thank you, Fabiola. Maha's other comment was the H and I are different when dealing in family setting. What is your view on that?
I would say the H and I, the approach will be different, but the H is even more important in a family setting. Then, I mean, the H is always important, but the H is even more important because you are dealing with human beings that you love and that you chose to be with. At work, it's true, but you know, there are differences to that. And so it's very important to acknowledge the fact that they have emotions. We have different opinions, and sometimes we can have very different backgrounds, even if we are in the same family. So for example, you need to acknowledge the fact, my example with the dinner was one, when you're 35 minutes late, you say, oh, my boss called. You need to acknowledge the fact that the person has been waiting for 30 minutes and they may be upset. So acknowledge that fact rather than focus on you and the fact that you're stressed and that your boss called. The interests are going to be different, of course, in a family setting, because at work, in a transaction, say you're closing a deal with a colleague, sometimes the interest could be more or less similar than in a family setting because that colleague is almost going to retire. That person is close to retirement. So they want to close this transaction quickly because they're retiring next week and they want to be able to show that they have closed this quickly. You, on the other hand, you're in the middle or at the beginning of your career. Whether this transaction closes today, next week, next year, makes no difference to you, makes no difference to the company. So you're in a rush. See, you have different interests. In the family setting, is the same. It could be the same thing. For example, if you're watching, I give an example with regards to eating spaghetti or ordering or taking out, eating spaghetti at home, preparing it at home, or actually taking out food. What is it that you're interested in? Well, I want to spend time together and I want to prepare the food together because we don't spend time together. It's an interesting comment that you don't spend time together because you're quarantined, but let's say, and the person says, yeah, but I want to eat Chinese food. It's really, I want the spices. So it's important always to ask those open questions. The answers may be different, but those open questions are always the same. Why? Why is it so important to you? What is it about Chinese food that you like so much? What is it about that video game that you like so much, et cetera, et cetera?
Thank you very much, Fabiola. And we have another question from Suzanne. Earlier, you had mentioned collaborative mindset. There were 3 parts to it. Transparency was the first one, openness the second, and what was the third one?
Share a common purpose. Remember that you always share a common purpose.
Thank you so much. And Preeti is asking, is this presentation going to be available online afterwards?
I think so, Aina.
Yes, Preeti, this presentation is being recorded and we will share the link to the recording after the webinar. I don't think we have any other questions so far, so perhaps there is one more coming in. Maha. The kids don't want any boundaries. They don't go to bed and they won't listen to what is good for them, but they need routine.
I agree. I think one thing with kids is open questions. Really make them speak and maybe try to find a common ground. And I'm just going to make this up, but it's important to acknowledge kids often, and I don't want to speak to them for them, but they often feel that their emotion is disregarded. They just feel that people are giving them orders, which could be somehow true. So I think one approach would be, if they don't listen, is maybe to understand first you focus on the H. That is the key. Focus on the fact that you understand their point of view, that you listen to them, that you respect them. It's very important not to attack, not to react. That is the key. And then after that, when they will feel that you listen to them rather than attacking them and judging them, well, then they will do the same for you. I would practice that.
Thank you, Fabiola. And I believe we have another question in the chat. If there is an emergency situation, how does this resolve conflict and do the right thing?
In an emergency situation?
I believe so. But maybe Satish, you would like to clarify a bit more?
I mean, conflict is conflict. Some conflicts have worse stake than others, of course, but how does this resolve conflict? Was that the question?
If there is an emergency situation, how does this resolve conflict and do the right thing? If there is a conflict of interest in emergency situation.
Oh, so a conflict of interest. I think you need to ask more questions because people have more than one interest. They will have multiple interests, and it is up to you to ask open questions and to let them dig further. For example, with the television, for example, the person wants to buy the big flat screen TV of $2,000. For example, one person says, I don't watch Netflix, so I don't care about your big flat screen TV. Says, yeah, but I can't pay the $2,000 100%. So there's a conflict of interest. But why is it so important for them to have a flat screen TV? Maybe the other person wants a flat screen TV, but it's just because maybe they feel that if they have a flat screen TV, they will spend more time with the person because now the screen is too small for the two. So it's spending time with the person that's important. So maybe we could spend time together. Okay, we can take walks, just keep the 2 meters distance, or maybe we could play poker. Maybe we could find something else other than buy a $2,000 flat screen TV. Maybe the screen TV could be also smaller. Maybe there are other ways to meet this interest. The key with the interest is if you have conflict of interest, you need to dig deeper. This is like you're acting like an investigator, really. That's what you are. So you ask open questions. That is the key. So if you haven't found a common interest, continue digging. Because at the end with families, what's fun is that we all have a common purpose. We all want to live in this home and go through this crisis. We all have this common purpose. So it's much easier, but we need to follow those steps, not react, not judge, consider the human, etc., etc.
Thank you, Fabiola. I believe we are coming to the end of our webinar. If we can take maybe one more question, if anybody wants to ask. If there are no more questions, then I would like to thank Fabiola for taking her time to share her insights with us today generously. Thank you very much on behalf of the school and of all the participants. And we would like to wish everybody happy negotiations, I guess, with their friends, family, peers, and using all the tips that Fabiola shared with us today.
Yes, good luck, everyone. Stay safe. Thank you. Thank you, Ina.
And stay safe. And we will be sharing the recording of this webinar later on. I would like to also invite everybody to join us for all the upcoming webinars this week. And you can find the schedule on the school's events webpage. So thank you very much, everyone, and have a great week.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, Ina. Thank you.
Bye, Fabiola. Thank you very much.